Elias left Zondique before the town was properly awake. The river was a strip of dull pewter under the early sky, and the air carried that wet mineral smell that made everything feel newly washed and somehow more exposed. He locked the door to the old orphanage behind him and stood for a moment on the step, listening not for anything specific, but for the house itself. Old buildings had their own language, a beam settling, a pipe contracting, the small, familiar sigh of wood changing its mind. This morning, the house offered nothing, no creak, no complaint, no reassurance. He walked to the station with his coat collar raised and his bag slung across his shoulder. In it, the folder of printed reports, 2 notebooks filled with dates and names, and the map he'd begun to turn into something he hadn't wanted to admit existed. A pattern. He tried not to think about the point it seemed to tighten toward, tried not to think about the way the empty spaces on the map felt heavier than the marked ones, as if absence could exert gravity. At the platform, a few commuters stood in their separate islands of mourning. Someone scrolled, someone yawned, someone stared into their coffee like it was a prophecy. Elias watched the rails instead. The lines ran away from him, clean and certain, and disappeared into a distance that did not care what you believed. When the train arrived, it did so without drama. Doors opened, people entered, doors closed. Elias found a seat by the window. The Zan slipped by, then the outskirts, then the gradual shift into more dense neighborhoods. Brick gave way to glass, low roofs to taller ones. The world became busier, and that busyness should have made him feel safer. Noise was a kind of armor, but Elias had learned that silence didn't need quiet to exist. Silence could hide inside noise like a thin blade inside a sleeve. He checked his phone. No new messages. That, too, felt like a message. The meeting had been called informal in the message he'd received, which meant it would not be informal at all. It meant there would be no minutes, no names attached, no official documents that could be subpoenaed, quoted, or leaked. The man from yesterday had no collar, no insignia, and had not given his name. Elias had not asked again. Names were the kind of thing that created obligations, and the man had seemed designed to avoid them. Amsterdam again, broader attendance, to contain its policy. Elias watched the city draw closer, as if the train were delivering him to a decision already made. At Amsterdam Central, the air was warmer, thicker with movement. The station's vaulted ceiling held sound the way a church held prayer. Announcements echoed, suitcases rolled, feet struck stone. People brushed past each other with the ordinary confidence of those who believed the world was stable. Elias stepped into the stream and let it carry him outside. The city was grey and bright, at once cloud cover with sudden seams of light. He walked along canals that reflected buildings like long, wavering memories. A bicycle bell cut through the air. Somewhere a boat engine coughed, then settled into a low purr. He reached the address just before 9. It was not a church, not visibly. A narrow building near a quiet canal, its facade plain enough to be ignored. A discreet plaque beside the door, the kind of thing most eyes slid over without registering. Elias rang the bell. The door buzzed, opened. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wax and paper. He climbed a staircase that was too clean to be old and too old to be fully modern. The landing at the top held a single closed door, another plaque unhelpfully blank. He knocked. The door opened before his knuckles made a second contact. The man without a collar stood there, expression neutral, as if he'd been waiting in the exact position for some time. "You came," he said. Elias stepped inside without answering. The room was larger than the building suggested. It should be one of those Amsterdam tricks, where space bent behind narrow architecture. A long table occupied the center. Around it sat people who didn't belong together except by necessity, to priests in black with Roman collars, both older, their hands folded with practiced stillness. A woman in a dark suit with a notepad already open, pen poised like a weapon. A man in a sweater and glasses who looked like he'd been pulled from a university office mid-sentence. Another man in clerical black, younger eyes, restless, as if he'd been awake too long. And, seated slightly apart at the end of the table, a figure, Elias, recognized not by face, but by posture. Someone who had spent years learning how not to be seen while still being present. The room's light was ordinary. The tension was not. Elias took the empty chair offered to him near the middle. No one introduced anyone. That, he understood, was the introduction. The man without a collar closed the door and moved to stand behind the chair at the head of the table, not sitting. Not claiming leadership, but occupying it by proximity. "We're here," he said, "because containment has become a practical question." The younger priest shifted in his seat. The suited woman wrote something immediately. The academic man cleared his throat softly, then thought better of it. Elias waited. The man continued, "We are not here to debate metaphysics. We are not here to declare causes. We are here to prevent escalation." One of the older priests, thin, sharp-featured, spoke without moving much else. "Escalation has already occurred." A faint, uncomfortable silence followed that word. Escalation, as if naming it made it more real. The man without a collar nodded once, which is why attendance is broader. The suited woman lifted her eyes. "We need to define what broader means, because there are parties who will want to be involved. And we don't want that," the older priest said. "We can't control that," the woman replied. The man without a collar raised one hand slightly, not a gesture of authority, but of containment itself, as if the room's conversation needed to be narrowed the way the disappearances had narrowed on Elias's map. "First," he said, "we share information. Then we decide on a posture." Elias almost smiled at the word. It sounded like something you adopted in front of cameras, something physical and measured. It sounded like a stance you could choose. He had the sinking suspicion the posture would be chosen for them. The academic man spoke then, with a cautious voice. "We still don't have verified data on mechanism." One of the older priests looked at him. "We have verified effects." "Yes," the academic said, "but correlation is not causation," Elias finished quietly. Several eyes turned to him. He felt, suddenly, like he'd stepped onto a stage in the middle of a play already in progress. The man without a collar regarded him with something like approval. "Elias has been recording." Recording was the safe word. Elias placed his folder on the table and opened it. Paper made a soft, satisfying sound. A small order imposed on chaos. He slid the map across the surface. It wasn't a large map, but it changed the room when it appeared. People leaned forward without meaning to. The suited woman's pen paused above her page. The younger priest's restlessness sharpened into focus. Elias pointed at the dots. These are confirmed disappearances in the zone region, tied to ecclesial proximity. Not necessarily inside churches every time, but within a consistent radius of ritual spaces. The academic man frowned. Radius, he said. Proximity, Elias said. A consistent distance. Close enough that the church is within sight or within habitual movement. The older priest with sharp features murmured, "Habit." Elias nodded. Yes, it follows behavior, not just geography. He traced the dots with his fingertip. The spacing isn't random, it narrows. The room was quiet. He could hear someone's breath catch whether in disbelief or recognition. He couldn't tell, the suited woman asked, narrowing toward what? Elias hesitated. He didn't like saying it out loud. It made it sound like prediction, and prediction made responsibility, but he pointed anyway, to the empty space where his finger had stopped last night. I don't know, he admitted. Yet, but if the spacing continues, the intervals continue, shrinking, then it converges. The younger priest swallowed. Like a net, Elias looked at him. The priest's eyes were bright and slightly feverish, like someone who'd seen something in the dark and couldn't decide whether to call it grace or horror.